Today I'm joined by JD Shapiro, an award-winning Hollywood screenwriter, director, and author. JD, welcome.
Thank you, Scott. I'm excited to be doing your show.
Now, I would have to say, when I was reading your bio, there was a little piece about the fact that in your early childhood, you just kind of got interested into storytelling as well as women. And that kind of became your passion, but not necessarily in that order. Can you explain a little bit?
Well, I grew up with three sisters and my mom. My dad was in and out in North Jersey in Hell's Kitchen, but they had Barbie dolls. So my mom tells me I did two things. One was I would take apart pens and try and figure out how they work, and the other was I would undress my sister's Barbie dolls to see what was underneath. So those became my passion, and like you said, not necessarily in the writing women order. Plus, I was very lucky that my sisters used to have their friends come over and practice kissing on me.
Did you like that?
Very much.
Excellent, excellent. Now, another notable background, and you've spent some 15 years, is you were working very closely with Stan Lee.
Stan Lee. Yeah, Stan Lee, the creator of the whole
since he passed away. But you were working with him on comic book content. So, what was that like?
Amazing. Not everyone lives up to your expectations, and Stan went beyond them. He is the greatest superhero he created. It was an amazing experience. We created all this comic book content, and hopefully it will come out soon. Some of it will. But Stan taught me a lot about writing, especially when it came to heroes versus the evil villains. And the one thing he stamped in my head was, the first time we spoke, he said, "Remember, Jakey," call me Jakey, "remember, Jakey, an evil villain and a superhero have the same powers. It's what they do with them that differentiates who they are." And that really stuck with a lot of things, not just with comic book content, but with all my writing. Plus, Stan and I had the same philosophy. We wrote for ourselves. We wrote things that we would want to go see and we would want to do, and hope that other people would enjoy it.
That's such an interesting motto, this notion that, the difference between somebody who's good and evil isn't so much their power as much as what they do with it. It's the result that they produce. And in some ways, it kind of has a metaphorical aspect to life and the impact that we leave behind.
Exactly, yeah. Stan was, if you look at his movies, there are a lot of life lessons, but I was so lucky because I didn't just work with him, we became very close. So he told me a lot of stories that aren't public knowledge. But that really ran through his entire life. And like you said, that runs through our lives. They were life lessons.
Wow, that's amazing. In effect, he was basically not only your supervisor, but he was your mentor and a life mentor that shaped your thinking and just how you viewed life.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. It was much more than just about writing. But I'll tell you, Stan had a great sense of humor, and people got to know him, saw that. And he liked busting chops. If he liked you, then he totally busted your chops. But a few months in, about 3 months in, he's still calling me JD or Jake, and we're standing at the elevator. It's myself, one of the other partners, and Stan. And Stan says he hasn't been feeling well. We're heading to a meeting. He says, hasn't been feeling well. So I said, "Stan, if you die, I'm going to weekend at Bernie's you." My other partner, his eyes went like this. Stan started laughing and slapping me on the back. And that's when, "Jakey, that's the funniest thing I ever heard." And the whole ride down the elevator, he was slapping me on my back. And I think that was the moment we totally bonded.
That's awesome. That's great. And of course, for people who've watched that movie, it's classic. So totally get that.
Yeah.
Now, you started screenwriting actually very early. I think in college, you wrote one of your first major movies, screenplays, Robin Hood Men in Tights.
It was actually right after I kind of graduated college, I wrote it, yeah. But in college, I was writing. I never thought I was going to be a writer, ever. But my mom was the one she was like, "Oh, I always knew you'd be a writer." Because I guess I was always writing, but I can remember in college, I'd say, "Hey, I have this great idea. Why don't you write it?" Because writing is tough. Writing, if I would not choose it, I would definitely not have chosen this path. This is a calling. It's not a choice. But yeah, Robin Hood Men in Tights was very early on, and I got a little bit spoiled with that because I thought, oh, it always happens that fast, because from concept to release was about 8 months, and that's maybe less. And no, what am I talking about? 8 months from concept? No, yeah, from concept to release. So it went really fast.
And it was a huge
I
success.
thought it was like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, when I looked at your bio, there was a statement that said you had rewritten and punched up many stupid scripts. Can you elaborate?
What was funny was, I'm dyslexic, so I didn't mean to write stupid. I was writing, I punched up many studio scripts. That's what I wrote, but I realized I wrote stupid, and I said, well, that's kind of true. I'm going to keep it. I won't say the names of the scripts, but there are some. I mean, I turned down 98% of the things I was offered. But then there were times I would take a script thinking, okay, this would be good, and then, I'd punch it up, or I'd creative consult or do rewrites, and then the studio would change it to something else, and it was very frustrating. So I actually stopped doing that for a while. So I won't name some of the movies, but they weren't great. There's some I'm very proud of that I'm not supposed to talk about contractually, but you can look on my website and kind of guess. But yeah, and obviously the worst script ever was Battlefield Earth, which I was the first writer on, but then got completely rewritten. So Hollywood tends to do that too often.
That's really funny. So I want to just spend a few minutes kind of getting into the mind of JD Shapiro, because you mentioned that it is a gift in a way. It's almost a responsibility that comes with it. Now, there are many great writers, but then I think there's only one of you. And what makes your writing and ultimately the product that becomes so unique? What happens in your mind as you write these things?
That's a really great question. The mind, it's a minefield. First of all, I wouldn't ever want to go into my mind if I was anyone else. I'd rather go into the den of lions and wolves because it's just, Hemingway said, writing is easy. All you do is sit at your typewriter and bleed. And I think what makes it unique is as long as I'm honest to my voice, what I feel, I can tell the same story in it. There's only a few amount of stories. I can tell a love story. I can tell a drama. I can tell a story about, two friends. But if I keep it real, that's cliche, but if I keep it honest to who I am and what I believe, that is when it becomes unique. If I try and service the studio, which I never did, which is I got fired a lot, or somebody else, or I try and guess what other people want, then I'm in trouble. And I think all writers are in trouble. If you stick to your individual beliefs and feelings, that's what makes it unique.
So I just want to take a step back, because what you're saying is actually very difficult. So, for people that are in your industry, I mean, they can really understand this point that you're making, but, the pressure that comes from the MGMs and the big brands, and then of course the producers and the directors and the executors, they want something their way. So how do you stand your ground and not sway and essentially create something that they want?
I don't, which is why I got fired a lot. So there's a term in the studio called "we want a pencil," and a pencil is someone who would do it their way. So typically what would happen is if I sold a script or set up a project, I would fight the notes. And typically, one time I actually told a studio executive, this is the worst effing idea that I've ever heard. I'm not doing it. And shockingly, I was fired that day. So I'm lucky in a sense, although I didn't realize it at a time. I think one of the reasons you're so successful is you both came from nothing. And when you come from nothing, you kind of have this, I believe, instinct to know that you could always go back. You don't want to ever go back, ever. But it's not like, as bad as it was, it's not as bad as, for me, compromising how I feel. And writing, I believe, is an obligation. I mean, you said it really well. It's in some ways it's a duty, because if you're going to put something out there, you're trying to get people to either see differently or laugh or feel something or think about something different. I used to want to change the world. I still do. But if I can just get one person to think differently, outside the box, as you talked about a lot, outside your comfort zone, if you talked about a lot in your terrific TED Talk, you know, those risks of even just thinking differently are so powerful. So I can't compromise in that. I think I read The Fountainhead when I was too young because there's a character there, Howard Rourke, who never compromised. And my agent, they used to have a Monday morning meetings, and other agents would pitch each other, like, hey, Paramount wants this, or Columbia wants this. And 98% of the time when someone would say, hey, someone's interested in Jake either writing and or directing this movie, my agent, Nick Reed, who knew me well, would say, Jake would rather be back in Jersey pumping effing gas than do this effing movie. So the studio stopped coming.
Actually, all of it makes sense once you understand that you grew up in Hell's Kitchen in New York and spent some time in North Jersey, correct?
Yeah, my mom was in North Jersey. My dad was in Hell's Kitchen. They were two completely different worlds, and yet very much the same. Because in New York, in Hell's Kitchen was the most notorious gang ever in the United States, the Westies. I didn't realize that at the time. I should have, because I was about 11 years old. I'm going to my dad's. And a guy looks at me. He was much older. Who knows? Maybe he was 18 or 25. I don't know. But to me, he was much older and bigger. And he was like, what you doing here? I said, my dad lives here. Are you Italian? They hated the Italians. I said, no, I'm German, Russian. You're Jewish? I went, yeah. And he went, all right, come with me. I don't know where I'm going. He takes me to his bar. He's one of the owners of the bar. And he gives me, have a drink. I'm like, I'm 11, have a drink. Okay, I don't think that was a question. And then he says, do you got a knife? I'm like, no. Well, you got to have a knife. What are you going to do if you get in a knife fight? And he proceeds to give me a knife that I still have to this day in storage and teaches me how to knife fight. Okay. So that was my upbringing there. And in Jersey, I grew up in a mostly predominantly black neighborhood and Italians. So my friends in Jersey were black and Italian. My friends in New York, much older guys, were Irish. The three shall never meet. So it was, and so it was, I got into a lot of fights. But it was a bit of a rough upbringing, but it really, I'm glad. Back then I wasn't, I had, Englewood was a town in North Jersey, which had from the extremely wealthy, not rich, wealthy, to the very poor. So depending on what was going on in my life, we were either, lower middle class or poor. Never very, very poor, but, we lost our house and things like that. So in retrospect, this turned out to be great upbringings for me. And I always had love for my parents. My dad just wasn't ready to be a dad, but there was love there for my parents and my sisters. And that's, I think, the key.
Well, it's very clear now as to why you're not a pencil pusher, and you stand on your 2 feet and you resist and you dissent. And I think that's terrific. So Thanks. This is a great transition point to talk about your book. Think Like a Man, the only guide you'll ever need. What is this book about, and why is this catered towards women? So I always had women come to me for advice, more women than men even, but because I was surrounded by women my whole life. And then one day I was just writing in a journal what I felt I wanted in a woman, and I realized I had a book because women don't understand how men. I used to say to my sister's friends, I used to get so frustrated because they didn't understand what I was saying. Now, I didn't understand what they were saying too a lot of the time, but this is about men. And that was the other thing. I got upset at these books that were written by women about men. And I'm like, no, I can't write a book about a woman. I'm not a woman. I might know more than most men because of how I grew up, but no. How dare you write a book about a man? Same thing with a man who writes a book about a woman. And then there was a really stupid book, He's Just Not That Into You. And I'm like, really? He's just not into you? If he marries somebody else, that's your advice? And I just thought, and I didn't read the whole book. I read parts of it. I read parts of Venus and Mars. And I just thought, these are professors or people. I'm in the field. I mean, I just happen to date a lot of women and a lot of different women. And I'm like the ultimate
ungettable, as I call it in the book. So if you can get me, then, you have a much better chance getting a man that you really want to be with. Because my sisters used to say to their friends, don't date him. He's great to be friends with. Don't date him. He's not serious. And of course, they would date me because they would think they could. So I talk about that in the book and giving women advice on how to empower themselves through this. It's not just about dating. It really is about empowerment. But I just feel the world would be a better place if women understood, that's my rescue dog. If women understood their innate abilities and understood that they're in more control than they realize. And so that's why I wrote the book, essentially just because I want the world to be a better place.
So if I'm understanding correctly, is this a manual that will help women to date JD Shapiro or George Clooney?
No. It's a manual of how not to avoid guys like me, and originally George, who's now married, but he was pretty much an ungettable. It's really to learn two things. One is it's like a competition. If I can beat Nadal in tennis, I'm going to be a great player. So if you can beat me, in a sense, if you can get me, and here's all the clues how to get me, how a man thinks, and it's not just me, it's every man who's read it and has been like, wow, you're giving away secrets, but we love this because if women did this, yes. And the things to do is easy. So it is a manual, but it's really how to empower yourself to get the man that's worthy of you. A man that is gettable. There's a lot of men who just aren't, and women waste their time with that guy, or who is and isn't right for that person, and the signs are so obvious, and it's not that he's just not that into you because he didn't get married or whatever. It's little things that add up, and men like to talk, as you can see, and so you can learn so much from a man. For example, if you're a woman, just let him talk. Not only you learn a lot, the man feels great because he's like, hey, she liked listening to me. So it's really to empower women how to get control, and in specific cases, how to move quickly away from what you don't want if you want a serious relationship, and then see what's obvious if you do want, because the obvious isn't always obvious, as you know. It's the forest for the trees type of thing. So yeah, it's a manual.
Interesting. So it's almost like a way for women to quickly evaluate whether it's going to be a long-term fit and it's going to lead to commitment in a way, so that they're not wasting their time into essentially the wrong person.
Right. That's one of the things I saw constantly in women coming to me with advice, the waste of time, and then repeating it, going to the same places they would go to meet the same type of guy, or dating the same type of guy. A lot of it's innate in us because we don't, as you talk about we don't want to leave our comfort zone. But in order to move on, in order to have success in any area, I believe, like you do, you have to get out of that comfort zone. You have to shake things up.
So let's talk about something slightly different, where if you look at some studies, there's been a change in population, and particularly interracial marriages has become very big. I mean, it's been happening for several decades. But in the last decade, because of online dating apps and mobile apps, that ability to commingle with circles and social circles that you would have not come into because you would typically have hung out in a kind of geographic same place, like you would say, is allowing for people to overlap socioeconomic, Venn diagram, so to speak. In situations like that, that's interesting. But at the same time, the other dynamics is that, especially among millennials, the notion of traditional relationship and kind of dating is kind of passé, and they're focused more on almost like transactional sex in a way. Mm-hmm. How do you explain this, and what would your book advise in this context? So
I have a few theories on that, starting with the transactional sex. I think a lot of it has to do with online porn. I think men unfortunately, it's so, when I was a kid, we had to sneak and get our, dad's Playboys and go and read them someplace. Now it's so easily accessible, and unfortunately, it can be very, okay, so how do I explain it? Women who do porn are allowed to do what they want, and that's fine. I'm not judging them. But unfortunately, I think with kids, if you're watching it at such an early age, especially men, I can only speak from a man's point of view, I would think that that affects how they look at women. And so therefore, sex is just transactional. In fact, I think there's studies in certain countries that men would rather watch porn than actually go out on a real date. So that I think is one of the reasons, and I'm not blaming the porn industry. The person has to take individual responsibility. But I think that has allowed men to move away from a traditional relationship. However, as far as interracial dating goes and mixed marriages go, or mixed relationship, I think that's great, because I think ultimately that's what's going to get rid of racism and xenophobia and all type of things. I used to do a comedy routine saying there should be a law that if you're black, you have to date someone white, or if you're Asian, you have to date someone black, and go through all these different things. Because ultimately, if everyone, you know, mixes, how can there be prejudice? That's not going to happen. Everyone isn't going to do that. But I think that that's great that a new generation, and you said it's been happening for a while. And I mean, I dated women of different races and religions and backgrounds. But the new generation they certainly see black and white, and we should see our differences and we should embrace them, but they don't care. It isn't a taboo as much for them as it was for an older generation. And that's great.
So I want to come back to your book in just a few minutes. Let's transition to talk about climate change. You mentioned to me at the onset, before we started recording, that climate change was very important to you. Why is it important to you, and what are you doing about it?
Number one thing, because I mean, I don't have kids. I'll be alive probably, but this planet's going to be destroyed. And the myth of Mars and the moon is stop. Okay, it's so many light years away. The way I think we solve climate change is simpler than we think. It should be put into the military budget. If you put climate change into the military budget, it's a game changer. I'm constantly preaching this. The reason why is, think about it. If we knew that aliens were going to come to Earth, we knew this. We had 97% of the scientists in the world said, oh yeah, aliens are going to come to Earth in the next 20 to 30, 50 years, they're going to destroy the Earth. We would put all this money into the military budget to stop the aliens. Well, the aliens are here, they're us. We're the alien to the planet that's killing it. So number one is, I think we should put it in the military budget. Number two is plastics. The whole thing with plastic straws, getting rid of plastic straws, is like putting a Band-Aid on a decapitation. Yeah, it's a start, but why don't we start with water bottles, because water bottles are mostly plastic, and they're also stealing the water from places and turning it into a commodity, which means water could become a commodity, and it is now in many regions. What else was I going to talk about? Fast foods. You know, at least if they're going to do fast foods, make everything biodegradable that they pack them in. But the problem with that is people don't, I say this and people laugh, you probably know, cow farts are a major cause of the problem. And the reason why there's so many cow farts is the fast food industry. And unfortunately, the cows are treated brutally. I'm in Spain right now, and their cattle runs free and open and green, and they're not fed all these hormones, and the food is so much better and healthier. And I do think this is going to make people laugh, but I actually think there's a way to harness the cow farts. I mean, when you think about it, we are a species that if we're backed into a corner, and I think you talk a little bit about this in your speech, back in a corner without a choice, we figure it out eventually. But when the lobbyists make us, still use fossil fuels and everything else, it doesn't push us to create. And so many ways to create. The sun, the ocean, the wind, but cow farts. No one ever talks about, hey, can we capture methane from the cow farts? I can literally picture backing up your car and seeing all these cows' butts on machines, and that's how you would fuel up your car. That's how crazy my mind, you ask how my mind thinks, there you go.
Oh, I love it. This is great. Well, we could go on forever, but let's come back here. Tell us about kind of the next most exciting project that's coming up in the near term.
Quickly, there's three. There's something called Spring's Eternal Youth, which is a World War II drama based on a true story, a book based on a book written by Magnus Arpes. I'm going to mispronounce the name. He's Swedish. The Swedish Film Institute funded the development. I'm really proud of that script. And it's female driven. It's how a woman changes a young woman, 20-year-old woman from Norway, living in Sweden, changes the course of the war. So there's that one. There's Lords of Dawn, which I'm waiting to hear back from HBO. That's a TV series. Again, female. Actually, that's kind of female and male driven, but more female, about kids, like the French Revolution, who decide it's time for a revolution because of what's going on in the world. There's Knights of the Not-So-Round Table, which is a spoof going back to Robin Hood Men in Tights. And I actually have Stan Lee in it because I filmed him a couple years ago. And a couple other Stan Lee projects, actually, that I'm excited about that no one knows about. And then there's a book I'm writing, and then I might be making a deal for a movie. Today I'm waiting to see if we're going to close the deal, if not next week, for a movie I'd write and direct called Active Shooter, which is kind of the Breakfast Club modern day, though, but with an active shooter in the high school, which is what gets the kids together. So you have everything that's going on within the classroom where they're opening up to each other because they don't know what's going to happen to their lives, with all the drama that's happening outside the classroom. And that's something I hope, is a statement movie without, you never pound it over people's head, but my goal with that movie is to get people to think differently about gun control in the United States, because after climate change, which, by the way, is a terrible name. Global warming was terrible. Climate change, it should be called, my friend said it. My friend Jamie said it should be called Ultimate Death. And I'm like, perfect, because that's what's coming if we don't do something about the planet. But with the gun control situation in the United States, I walk around in Europe, and I'm surrounded by more enemies here than you are in the United States, and I feel safe. I mean, the United States, whenever I go back, I grew up in a neighborhood where I looked around, so it's not new to me, but it's new that it's heightened now. I worry too much when my niece goes to school and my nephews. It's when my sister goes to the mall or a game or something like that, it just, so, and I can't imagine what it's like. You and I probably grew up when you were in the United States. Here is we had fire drills, and we always knew it was some kid who pulled it to get out of an exam. We missed the bomb scares, and we miss now. I can't imagine what it's like being in school and trying to study when you're having drills of an active shooter that aren't going to do anything. And, it's like hiding under the desk if there's a nuclear bomb. I just can't imagine what the psychology is, which actually, as I speak to this, that might play into the way people are dating now, because they might feel, I felt immortal until I hit a certain age, but I don't know. I would guess that plays into it, because maybe kids today feel their mortality, which is really sad. Because I did crazy things. I jumped off the roof with a cape on, with a bed sheet onto a mattress, thinking this would work. I broke my ankle. When I skied, I wasn't very good. I would jump like crazy. So anyway, I didn't know my mortality.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting insight. And actually, I'm going to have to ruminate on that, because there could be definitely some research worthwhile to look into. I want to just come back and say that want to wish you the very best with the various, multiple projects that's in flight. And I hope that some of these will get into production in the next months to years, and hopefully be able to see it in the big screen. Now, for the audience that are interested in following your work and interested in getting hold of your book, how can they do that?
So you can follow my work at jdshapiro.com. It's very simple, my name.com, and that's my website. And the book you can go to, it's now on Kindle at Amazon, and it's under $5 on a Kindle. And you can actually go into bookstores. Barnes & Noble that's my ugly friend. Barnes & Noble is carrying it. We always bust each other chop. Barnes & Noble is carrying it in bookstores, and all fine and not so fine bookstores everywhere. And Barnes & Noble online, Amazon, Books A Million, a lot of places. And it's been getting good reviews. And if you like it, please, word of mouth is what is what gets a book traction. So please tell people, and if you don't like it, tell me, because I'd be curious to hear, I like to hear people's thoughts, positive and negative. I learn from them. I might not agree all the time. I certainly won't, but it's interesting to hear.
Terrific. So on that note, I've been joined by JD Shapiro, an award-winning Hollywood screenwriter. JD, thanks for joining.
Thank you very much. It's a